This morning to try to do this on my desktop, and the IT guy was a bit frantic, saying that looks like there's a power issue somewhere in the school, but we were able to connect a little bit. So fingers crossed that we don't get locked out anymore.
We'll go with it and see what happens, but hopefully it'll all be positive for you. And I was going to say fair play for being up at 8 o'clock this morning for being on call. But then when I saw that you're in the office or classroom where you're at, I was like, wow, that's big commitment. Fair play.
Yeah, no worries. I'm glad things worked out. I know we've been trying to set this up for a little bit, so I'm excited. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely, and thank you as well for being adaptable and making this happen today. So, once you sort of finished this morning, is it back home for you then, or some work around the school or office, or
round two maybe?
Yes, absolutely. True adaptability right here, Chip. I love it.
Yeah, right. So just trying to. Looks like it's the wing of the building that my classroom's in that is having some technical difficulties. So I think we've got it sorted out now. Thanks for being patient.
That's right. No problems at all. Thanks for moving around and looking to sort it out, which I really appreciate.
Sure.
So after this, then, is it a day back home then, or is it doing some stuff around the school, or how's the day looking?
Yeah. So last week of classes, exams this week. So I've got a couple of things I'll need to wrap up. Getting into exams on Tuesday, and then summertime, right? So a little bit of time to grade some things and wrap up the school year, and then a little bit of downtime. My wife's also a teacher, so we'll have some time off a little bit, but lots of honey-do lists and a giant gazebo to build. So lots of fun stuff in the future for sure.
Sounds like it's all to come for you, which is going to be a great summer for sure. So how many teaching weeks do you have left now?
So we just have the one. So this week coming up is our final week. It's exam week. So final tests, and then get the kids out of here for the summer. Should be a good week.
And when do they return from summer then? Yeah,
so we'll start back probably middle of August. So usually around like the 15th or the 22nd. So pretty nice little break for them.
A little bit different to us. So again, I got a teaching week this week. Then we got like a half term, and then we got 7 weeks of teaching then after that. And then we'll be back then in September. So we're slightly on different schedules towards you over here in the UK.
Gotcha. What do you teach?
So I teach a bit of business, a bit of history, and then what's called Welsh back then. So it lasts like a general skill set then. So that's what I teach during the day, but I tend to teach to our students who don't tend to fare well in their mainstream setting. So all the kids who have behavior issues.
Yeah, my wife is a special education teacher, so she is an inclusion specialist. She goes into the classroom and works with some kids who need that boost. So people who work with those kids who need that extra help, man, nothing but respect for you guys and what you guys do. It's a blessing and a calling for sure.
I appreciate that. I love that. Well, Chip, today's episode's all about you and your experiences, and we're going to explore and unpack some questions, which I'm really looking forward to, and bridging that around some topics. But it'd be good if you could explore your wealthy experience, which you have, and lead us through a bit of a journey on that.
Yeah. So wealthy experience. I guess that's the way I've kind of ended up the last few years looking at it, right? Like doing what I get to do with people that I love to do it with has been pretty special. So I'm from Toledo, Ohio, originally from a small town around the Lima, Ohio area. Grew up, in a town of about 12,000, 13,000 people. So real small community, but it was nice because, you knew everybody and everybody knew you, and, you looked after each other and all that stuff. And then came up to Toledo for university and majored in secondary education with a emphasis on English with a minor in literature. So graduated from the University of Toledo in 2002, and I've been teaching ever since in the Toledo area. And then obviously, I know one of the reasons why we're here is the football, the soccer aspect of it. So grew up playing soccer at the grassroots level, went through, all the way through to high school, played a little bit of travel once I got to that age. Had some opportunities maybe here and there to go play at some smaller schools, but decided not to. I wanted that big campus kind of college experience. So came up to the University of Toledo, which is about 20,000 at the time, 20,000 students. And then right away, my second year of college, started coaching soccer in the area. So I actually called a local school, St. Francis de Sales High School, of all boys school. And they were the only school that called me back. So the head coach at the time was looking for an assistant. He gave this young kid that he knew nothing about an opportunity. Spent about 8 years at St. Francis, went from being an assistant to a junior varsity head coach, went to the varsity level and was an associate head coach there. While I was doing that, got involved in the club scene a little bit with a club called Pacesetter Soccer Club out in Sylvania, Ohio. Probably around 2000, I think, was when I first started, maybe 2003, first started coaching at the club level. And then from there, just had a couple of, wonderful experiences. Left St. Francis, went to another local school as the head coach, Anthony Wayne, for the boys side, coached there for a year, left for some different circumstances, and then coached at Northview High School, which is also in Sylvania, on the girls side with a good friend of mine, Rick Bergen, and loved it. And then after that, Notre Dame Academy, where I'm currently at now, is an all-girls school in Toledo. They came calling, and they offered me a teaching position as well, which as a career path was kind of one of those things I always wanted to do. I always wanted to teach and coach in the same building. And when I got that opportunity, highly prestigious academic school, lots of really, really positives about their athletic program as well. It was a no-brainer for me. Plus, I have 2 young daughters, right? So at the time, 2 young kids, 2 young daughters who had, in conversations with my wife, had discussed private school and going that route with kids when we got to that point anyway. And then took the job. My daughters are here now. I have one who's an 8th grader, one who's a sophomore. So that's been great. And then I've been teaching and coaching here since the fall of 2011, and have loved every second of it. It's a beautiful community. It's a great place to work. Unbelievable people. My kids love the school. It's been a real blessing to be here.
It definitely sounds it, especially to be there for 13 years later, and to have 2 children then come through into the setting as well. That combination of teacher, coach, and then a parent in and around that as well. So it becomes more than a job; it's more or less a family environment for you, and that's a bigger picture where it's all combined together, which makes it even more special, I suppose. Yeah,
and it's given me one of the cool things about it too is I've gotten to teach my daughters. Right. So I had my youngest Emma as a 7th grader last year. And then I've actually had my oldest, I had her twice. So I had her as a 7th grader because she was in what they call the junior academy level. And then I had her as a freshman again. So that's been an unbelievable experience as a dad, but also as an educator too, to, have your kids in the classroom with you. And my youngest daughter is a player as well. So she's going to hopefully roll through the program here and finally get a chance to be coached, officially coached by dad, which will be a lot of fun too. But I think it's been what you described it as, a real family and a real community. So I've enjoyed it.
And it's really nice the way that you have that then, because there are even more experiences which you have. So, rather than just being dad at home, it's nice to teach your daughter in a classroom environment, and then nice to coach her, because they're little segments which she might take away. Oh, I remember dad teaching me this in this lesson. I remember dad coached me at this. And she might not remember all of it because, if we remembered everything by every coach and every lesson, we'd be the most knowledgeable person in the world. But if she even takes away segments, then as she gets older and then as she grows and becomes a mother herself, etc., she's like, actually, I'm going to pass this on from what my dad passed on to me. And it's that moment which she'll take away forever, which I think is even more magical from an outsider.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's already happened in small ways too, right? So little things even in the classroom. My oldest, we were talking about a unit on poetry that we did when she was a freshman, and then of course sophomore level, right? She has it again. She has poetry again, and just little things that she was able to sort of take away from my class, and then use in somebody else's class was kind of cool. I was like, oh, you were listening. You actually were listening and paying attention to what Mr. Smith or sometimes even Dad was saying. So it's been fun. It's been cool.
I love that, and it's definitely a great one to have. So, for you, do you find it hard then to switch off between coach, dad, and then teacher, then in that relationship at all?
It's funny that you say that, because it's kind of based on the kid, right? So my oldest daughter Morgan was very at school, Mr. Smith, and then in the car on the way home was dad, right? So it was a really, really kind of easy thing for the two of us to maneuver because she kept it that way. Right. I kept it that way, obviously, because I believe in being professional, and whether it's your kid or not, right? And then with the youngest one, Emma, the line has been blurred a little bit more, I think on her end, and she's at times, hey, Dad, Mr. Smith, kind of thing in the classroom or in the hallway. So it's just been different. It's not been difficult for me at all to do it, but I think with the kids, it's been really easy for Morgan to do. Somewhat maybe confusing at times for Emma, but we've gotten through it. I'll probably have her again next year, her freshman year, in honors English. So probably, there'll be some growth in that regard on her end, but no, nothing too heavy. I think the hardest part sometimes for me is, having a daughter that plays now and plays at a pretty high level, is just being dad, right? So you get in the car after a game, and obviously as a coach, you watch and you see things, and you make note of things they're doing really, really well, but then obviously things you see that they could do better at. It's been difficult at times for me to just keep my mouth shut, and just be dad and be like, hey, great job. Did you have fun? What do you want to eat? That kind of thing. So that's been a bit of a struggle, if I'm being honest, but it's a work in progress.
It sounds good, and they're all moments which I hopefully look forward to in the future myself. So not a parent yet, but they're all, as I've coached with parents and I've taken things away, and what I see from them is like, I can't wait for these moments when I get there as well. So, but every time I hear from someone, like, I want to take bits away from when I can sort of prepare for those moments as well, because it's been good because I've been able to work with parents who have been coaches, and I've sort of been able to step in between at times when, sometimes the child's gone back at the father during the session because, it's very high intense environment. The players are surrounded by all these pressures, and then it's just bang, because his coach, they've said it back, but because his dad, they've had that comfortability to say it back to dad. And then therefore, sometimes you don't want that relationship to break down because the dad's going to get frustrated, then the kid's going to get frustrated. So by able to mediate, it's like, actually, dad's saying this because of this. And therefore, we actually want to keep that relationship going so it doesn't break down on the pitch. Because I know I was a player, and then when my dad became a coach, I became very comfortable in telling him how things were in training. And then it actually broke down over time between training, and it became frustrating for him. And then it was as if I was undermining him, and then he had to try and play that out in front of the other players and be more of a disciplinarian, because if he let me get away with things, then the players were going to get away with things, and therefore there was going to be a breakdown in structure and discipline. So I always look at the experience I had as a player, and then I try to mediate as a coach between that other relationship between, a father and son, for example, so they don't have that fallout that I had with my dad when he was coaching. And it became an unenjoyable experience for me because he got frustrated, and then I made it frustrating for him. So, and I look at these kids and I don't want the same for them. So I try to pass on that experience, but I also try to learn from it as well at the same time. But, when you're 11, 12 and you're growing up into teenage years and your dad's coached you for the first time, it's a great thing because you get to enjoy it because dad's coach, but you're also in that position where I became too comfortable without realizing, and look back and go, do you know what? I wish I had someone just whisper in my ear.
Yeah. My assistant coach, Erin Webb, her daughter actually came through the program and played for us. So Julia was in the program for 2 years before Erin came on staff. And then Erin came on staff when Julia was a junior. And I remember sitting down with Erin, and that was one of her big concerns, right, was that Julia was in the program and, she didn't want that relationship to become strained or whatever. And it was kind of a funny, we kind of did an under the table kind of handshake that, I would coach Julia. Right, Julia was the person that I would be responsible for, and that Coach Smith would do, the majority of the coaching, and be in Julia's ear and make sure that she was getting the information that she needed, and then that allowed Erin, I think, in a lot of ways, to still coach her. Erin is a beautiful mind when it comes to coaching and working with people, but it also gave Erin, I think, that that mom role still was the most prevalent role in their relationship. Right, it wasn't player coach, it was mom and daughter. So Erin said, hey, when Emma gets to high school, I'll coach Emma. You just leave her to me, and I think that gives you that opportunity, which is important, obviously, as we all know, to have great assistants and people around you that can step in and fill those things and do different things for you. So that's kind of the unspoken rule, perhaps, that and it was a great piece of advice, like let other people coach your kids. Like, that's okay, when you're coaching them, to let other people coach your kids, and allow for that dynamic as father son in your example, or mother daughter and in her example, to still be the priority relationship. So we'll search through it. We'll go through it. I'm excited about it. Obviously, I can't wait to have an opportunity to do that.
I like the way that you put that as well. Let other people coach your kids, and that's okay. The dynamic within that and that priority relationship, because they're all very important segments, especially if your coach didn't have a child, and it's still that relationship with any player to come through the door. So when you look at that person-centered one, when you talk about your daughter in a way that she has, Mr. Smith in the classroom and then her dad in the car, she set those boundaries and she understands where those parameters are. For when you get a player who isn't, of any relation to you, and they come in and they want to be part of a program, when they sort of have their own parameters, because everyone's got their own different personality and the way that they approach things, do you take that on board and just accept that for the way they are at times, or do you see that as sometimes the parameters have to be moved to open up a bit more of a relationship with them, to connect with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about priorities, right, and what people are sort of after, right, and I think this will come back to what we talk about here later as well. Everybody wants to accomplish something, right, and so the very first thing that I want to know about a kid is when they come into our program, like, why are you here, right? Like, what is the end goal for you? And some kids come in and say, I want to come in and I just want to be a part of the experience, and I want to meet people and I want to have fun, and then there's other kids who will come in, and, all coaches can relate to this, and they'll say, I want to accomplish this, and this, like, I want to play at the university level. I want to be all Ohio, so I think it's important right off the bat that you kind of get a feel for what's the why, like, why is the kid in your program, right? And then from there, looking at the program and the core values and the virtues and the things that you believe in, and making sure that the kid understands that this is how you can accomplish those things within the framework of our priorities and how we try to do things, right? And taking that individual goal, or that mindset that they have, and then moving it into the collective. This is how we do things here, and if you do things the way we do things here, this is how it can help you accomplish the things that you want to do, right? So if a kid says to me, hey, I just want to have fun and I want to meet people, okay, well, within the framework, then commitment in our program is big. Like, then be here, right? Be committed to the off season, be committed to the things that we're trying to do before the season even starts, because that's how you're going to meet new people and you're going to meet new friends and whatever. Or if, you have a player that wants to go to, let's say, to the university and play, okay, here's how we do things, and here's how that's going to help you get ready for the next level. So I think it's first and foremost important that you understand why the people in your organization are there, what they're after. And then from there, okay, here's how we can help you. But understand we're going to help you within the framework of the collective. It's never going to be about one individual. But we certainly understand that, people have individual goals. And I said this to someone this past season that, I realized after a while coaching that, if something is important to one of your players, it should be important to you, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody says to me, hey, I want to set this record, or I want to, be on the field during this game, I think that has to be important to you as a coach. But at the same time, it can't be more important than how you're trying to do things as the entire group. So, but I really, at first, I used to be like, no, I mean, it's all about the team. It's all about, it's all about what we're trying to do as a collective. But, I have given more thought, I think, and trying to understand that if it's important to her, it should be important to me, and how do I help her accomplish that, but still within the framework of how we're trying to do things.
I really like the way that you piece that together. If it's important to the player, it should be important to you, but not more important than the group, and therefore it should be within that collective framework. Yeah. And I think that's so important. And I can think of some staff that I work with whereby they don't perhaps have that greatest relationship with an individual, and therefore that relationship breaks down over a period of time. And that's because they've got their own principles and the way they want to approach things. However, they haven't looked at what's important to that child, and therefore adapting it to a need whereby they have this framework which they can apply, but then therefore if it's disruptive to the entire group, then that's why they're removed from it. But it's about having to build that relationship with them over what's important, and then getting that individual back into that classroom environment, or trying to rebuild that relationship. And the same goes for coaching, because again, you might have a load of players come in with different personalities, different wants and needs, and they might just be there for that social element. They might just be there because they want to be competitive. They might want to progress onto a scholarship or a bigger program, for example. So when you have these different combinations of personalities, it's important to understand, right, actually they may need to be grouped together in this session today because they're there for the social element, and therefore we need to look at the competitive players and how they're looking to compete, because the importance is getting these scholarships for us important for these players to have that social aspect and to enjoy that experience and go, do you know what, I actually enjoyed being part of that program, because we can't just dismiss players over the case of other players and look at that sort of angle of it. And again, it comes down to priorities within that, but then it's also trying to have a bit of a balancing act within that, which can be difficult at the same time.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the blending of those whys, right? Why kids are in your program, that can be difficult, right? Like at times that can be difficult because you've got, you know, for lack of better words, the 1% mindset, you know, the ultra competitive kid, the ultra talented kid, and then you've got the kid who is not that, and that's okay. You know, how do you blend those two together? You know, I think you're right. I think, you know, sometimes you've got to look at it and say, you know, today this group needs to be together. Today that group needs to be together. Today we all need to be together, you know, and I think that is something that as a coach, we, you know, as coaches, I know we try to be aware of. You know, I mean, the reality is that those 1% kids, right, they sometimes struggle with that mindset, you know, of maybe a kid who's not a 1%er, as I call them. So, you know, how do you blend them together? You know, why do you blend them together? I think that's something that's an ongoing challenge and an ongoing question that we have to try and figure out. You know, how can we benefit both kids at the same time? That can be difficult.
And it can be difficult, again, when you're coaching certain groups as well, because as a coach, if you were to do a camp, for example, and you had lots of different groups within that, and someone said to you, look, Chip, we got this group that's going to be based all around their fun and fundamentals, so it's only going to be about social skills. Then we've got this group over here, which can be highly competitive, lots of intensity, all about their core work, looking at the technical and trying to get them to an even higher level.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes as a coach, you might see yourself going more towards the really technical group, and then other times you might go, actually, I just want a bit of fun with the group today. I want to get loads of games in, and I just want to see players enjoy it. But in the heart of hearts, you might actually go, well, more of me is segmented towards the technical groups, and therefore when you're in those environments, you might spend more time working with the high competitive players and those who might be, you know, looking towards the higher levels. And then sometimes without realizing, you're dismissing the other players within that. But that's just sometimes where the attributes come in, and then that's why you have assistant coaches. But then you might have, you know, that little pull factor towards what is important to you and your values as well, and that's why it might connect you with one group closer than the other.
Yeah, and I think early on as a coach, that was definitely a mistake that I probably made, right? I tended to gravitate more towards that higher end group, right? And spend more time with them because it was fun and it was how I thought, you know, the game should look and whatever else, right? And then the more and more I've coached, especially at the high school and the youth level, the more I've realized the importance of building from the bottom up, right? Like you've got to take those players who really need that refinement and spend more and more time with them, because, you know, a lot of things happen, right? People get hurt, people leave, people whatever. And if you can prepare those kids to be the best version of themselves, you know, I think that's important. So I've tried, and again, it's never perfect, right? But trying to really look at the kids who need that refinement, spending more time with them over and over again. I think it's critical to the success of a team. It builds depth, it builds camaraderie, it builds a lot of things, not to mention, you know, you're making them better. And I tend to think too, that you see a quicker, bigger jump with that group too, right? Those kids. So I love working with our junior varsity team, for example, right? Like I love getting out there with them and, you know, really working with them on just the basic things sometimes, but also giving them a look at what it's going to be like at a higher level. Like this is where we're trying to get you to, and this is where you're going to have to get at some point if you want to be there. And they don't always get it, you know, and it's a struggle. It's more developmental for sure. But when they do get it in those little moments, they're like, oh, you know, I can actually at some point, maybe not next year, maybe not this year, but at some point, like I really think I can get to that level. That's pretty exciting. And it's huge for your program too, that kids know what the varsity level is going to look like, that they can do it. And helping them get there it's been fun. That's coaching, right? Like that's the best part of it.
And I think that's what the enjoyment of it comes to, and it's being that coach then, which is different towards the others. So as you've adapted and you have these players come in and you're working with these different groups, they're actually like, you know what, Coach Chip actually is engaged with me, and this is more than, you know, Coach Katie's engaged with me because she wants to work with higher technical players. Chip's actually given me this and I've taken this away, and actually they might even look at that years later and actually be enjoying their game because of what you've been able to enable them to do, whereas they've been dismissed potentially by another coach or overlooked. And therefore, when you see some coaches, they might actually go, you have the players who have that social element, but we need to hold them accountable and bring them up to standard of the higher technical players. And that's how you start to frame your group in terms of who's going to end up leaving, how you chip away some of the players. And sometimes coaches do that for the own detriment of the players who maybe not as technical because they want a highly competitive group, they want to compete, but then they're dismissing those players in the process. And it's then working out what kind of coach you want to be and who you are going to be when you're on that pitch in that relationship with those players.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that, unfortunately. I've probably done that, unfortunately, right? And I think when I took the job here at Notre Dame, one of the very first things that I sat down and thought about, like really thought about, was why am I here? Like, what is my goal? Like, what is my, you know, they use the word vision a lot, right? And the thing that I wrote down was I want to give our
There you go. I think we're back in progress.
All right, good. Yeah. No, just to your question earlier, you were saying, you know, my goal is to give our kids the best experience possible in the country, right? And so we try to, you know, do a lot of different things to do that. But I think ultimately what I've had to remember is if you're trying to give the kid the best experience possible, you know, you've got to try to meet them where they are as players, as people, and work with them and try to build those relationships and those connections. And, you know, that's a part of a great experience, right? Is being, like you said earlier, you know, feeling like you've been seen and heard and worked with and developed and cared after. So we try to approach it, you know, in a lot of different ways. If we're going to give the kid the best experience, number one, I think we're playing a sport, right? So how do we help them develop in that sport and become the best version of themselves within that sport? So that's certainly something that we try to do.
And when we talk about, and I know we discussed some of the topics prior to setting up today, and one of the topics that was going to come up is elite environments, elite coaching, and elite sport at youth level. And when you're looking at that elite level and you're looking at the kind of players who come in, their attributes, their personalities, which we touched upon earlier, we're looking at those connections, we're looking at the relationships, we're looking at the different dynamics within that, and we're looking at the priority of relationships and how that looks. So it all pieces together and they're all great considerations. But when you are trying to build that elite environment, how difficult is it when you're trying to balance the group in terms of those social personalities and those wants and those whys, and then trying to uphold standards of an elite environment at all times?
I don't know if it's difficult. I mean, it is obviously, right? But that's a question that I've been thinking a lot about that you asked me earlier, right? Like the elite sport at the youth level, like, is it real? Right? Can you really have an elite environment at the youth level? And I really went back and forth on it, but I think, yes, you can. I think you can, right? I think the elite level of youth sport, I think it comes down to the standards. I think it comes down to how you want to approach things. It doesn't mean you have elite players. I think that's the thing that I came back to, is that an elite level and an elite environment that you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that the kids are all elite players, right? But I think the environment that you set up for them allows them to maximize their potential, right? And so the question becomes, is that difficult to do? Yeah, it is. But I also think if you have in place, you know, the standards and the core values and the expectations that this is how we're going to do it, I think that makes the environment elite. Right? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say, like your vision and your thoughts on how that looks, upholding those things and making sure that the kids know what's going to be expected of them, and that there is going to be a high, you know, expectation for things like your work rate and your attitude and those kinds of things. I think that's what makes an environment elite. Again, I go back and say it doesn't mean that all the players are elite, but I think you can have an elite mentality. right? And I think that's the thing that we try to instill here is this is how we're going to do things. Some of you are going to be able to do it right away, and some of you aren't, and that's okay. But we're going to all try to do it, and that makes that elite mentality and that elite culture that when they step into a session or they step into a game, it's not maybe an elite performance, but it's an elite mindset. And we've had some wonderful players that have come through this program, and we've had some players that weren't as good as those players who had maybe the most elite mindsets that we've had, right? That they were going to get out there no matter what the situation was and work as hard as they could and be a great teammate and compete and do all these things. And I think that's what has helped to build our elite environment. We like to think that we do things in an elite way here. Has nothing to do with the drills that we do, right? It has nothing to do with what type of player they are. It's a mindset, it's an attitude that they have, and we've been blessed to have some great kids here.
And I think it's so relatable in terms of what you said, because as you're saying that, I'm reflecting upon some of the environments which I've been able to observe and been able to witness as well. And I think just because you have an elite environment doesn't mean the players are elite as well, because some people might associate that, I need to get my son or child into this because all the players are going to be elite and therefore they're going to increase the accountability, the standards of my child because they're going to be around those players. Well, not necessarily. The environment's going to do that, and you might have one or two elite players within that team of 20, and therefore they might bring up the standards and build those relationships, but it doesn't mean that players around them are elite. So I think that environment is absolutely important right now, and how it allows those players to look at that. So in terms of that, if I give you a bit of context, Wales and England are very close to each other. Mm-hmm. So within the border, from where I live, it's about half an hour within that. So a lot of players try to go over the border because in England, you have what's called the Junior Premier League. And the Junior Premier League is set up to be very competitive. It's all about results. You can track tables. It's looking at players. You can win trophies at the end of the year. You compete in cups. Now, in Wales, we don't have anything like that until at least under 13s. And when it comes to that, even then, under 13s level is 9v9, and then it moves up from 11v11. So anything from under 6s till under 13s is almost a format of 4v4 to 9v9. No league tables until that. It's not competitive as such, and it's more about the fundamentals and getting players through the game. So by the time the players in Wales have played till about 10, 11, they're like, well, actually, I played in this system for 5 or 6 years. It's not very elite as such. And that's why they try to look at academies, or they try to jump over to the Junior Premier League in England and spend a lot of time traveling around. So that's why you get to see a lot of development of a very successful Premier League program at the moment. That's why you see the English national team producing endless amounts of players. And that's why perhaps Wales isn't producing as many players as England are at the moment. So those different elite environments, for me, being between both and having a coach between England and Wales, I can see the difference an elite environment can make compared to having a very fundamental environment, and the difference that has on the players and those connections and upskilling those players, which is really important. But then how can I and we as coaches then in Wales create elite environments for these players when the environment hasn't been created for us for a national syllabus, for example? So when it comes down to the coach in that environment and what they want to instill in those principles, it doesn't have to be determined by external factors. It's about what you then do within a framework, which then is important towards why your players are attracted to you, attracted to that program, what they want from you as a coach, and then how you bridge that together through those relationships and what you instill on the pitch.
Yeah. First of all, that's I didn't know that. Like, that's fascinating to me, right? The way things are done overseas, obviously, and just different environments in general. Or I like to study environments and different teams and coaches, and try to see how they do things. So that's interesting. I think the thing for me is when I was thinking about the environment that I wanted to set up here at Notre Dame. I thought to myself, okay, besides obviously the vision that I have and wanting this to be a great experience, right? The best experience for the kids is ultimately then as a soccer coach, like, what is my job, right? And so I guess my job for players is, no matter what goals they might have next, is to try to help them get to that next level, right? Whatever that next level is. So for a kid who is on our JV team, the next level for them might be varsity the next year, right? A kid who comes in as a freshman and plays varsity right away, the next level for them obviously might be to go play in college. So for me, when I think about our environment and how we try to do things, and maybe in your situation too, is what's the next step? Like, what's the next level for those kids, right? And so how do I do that? How do I get them to that next level? And so I'm trying to shape things that we do in practices for that next level, and hopefully they know that when they come here, this is going to be the level that they're going to be in, but it's going to get them to this level hopefully next. So that's how I try to set things up, is how do we have a level already present for them that can help them get to whatever the next level is for them.
And when you present that level and generating that, what are your expectations, and how do you create a level for players to upskill themselves and to reach those, or to reach that mentality which is going to exceed to the next level?
I think it comes down to, again, sort of the values and the culture and the things that you believe in, right? So for me, it's not about the exercises that you do. It's not about the tactical insight that you give a player. It's not the technical work. It's these are the things that we believe in doing. So for example, like, one of the things we believe in is competition, right? So the things that we're going to do within our environment is going to have a big level of competition to it, right? Or we're gonna have positivity, right? We're big into the positive. Not that you have to be positive all the time, but we believe in that, right? So I think it's the core values that we have. And so, being competitive, being positive, being focused, being intentional, like, no matter what level of player you are, that if you focus on those things and you really work towards those things, it's going to make you a better player, right? It's going to make you a better person. So for me, how do I do that? I let those things that, I think that all people can control kind of guide what we do. If that makes sense.
When you have those players which guide what you do then and how they take that forward, that can be a very good cylinder or aspect of your training program, because you might have players who are very good leaders on the pitch, and therefore they might take an element to the next level. And as they're able to do that and able to demonstrate to the players around them through their natural ability, these players want to step up and might look at Joseph, for example, and Joe's a really good player, and they want to step themselves up to be more like Joe and to take things away. So naturally, you're creating a very competitive environment and how that looks and how that comes across then. But, not every player has the attributes and inner ability to be competitive. And again, it does come back down to those social elements towards just going and playing. And I know when I was a younger player, I was all about the social funness, but now I'm a lot older, I'm all about competitiveness, and I really struggle when things aren't held to a certain accountability, because I want us to have that high intensity. I want us to have those performance indicators in there. I want us to look at maximizing every opportunity in our potential. And therefore, if some individuals fall below that, then sometimes I struggle with that, because I want them to reach those levels, because I know they've got the ability to do that. So then I know I have to approach it in a certain way where I allow them to project themselves and then open up an environment which I can explore the other options to how they reach these high levels, which they might not have achieved in the past before. But when you have these players in front of you and they might not be as competitive, how do you then get them to be competitive? How do you get them to aspire to really push themselves to higher levels?
Yeah. A big question that, I've gone back and forth. I just asked my wife this question last night. I asked her, I said, do you think that everybody's competitive? Like, that's a question that I've had a lot of conversations about. Like, is everybody born as a competitor? And the more and more I think about it, I think the answer to that question is yes. Like, I think deep down in all of us, there is a level of competition, right? There's a level of a competitor. I think the thing that obviously we can all agree on is that there's different levels, right? So there's the alpha competitor, the one who comes out of the womb when they want to win everything all the time, and they are cutthroat and they are this. And then there's the kid who, obviously is maybe a little more subtle, right, in their competitiveness. So I think the question that you pose is a really interesting question. How do you take the less competitive? I think the first thing that I try to eliminate from my mindset is that they're less competitive, right? I think the thing that I really tried to think about the last 5, 6, 7 years is that somewhere in there's a competitive person. So are they as competitive right now? Will they maybe ever be as competitive as her? maybe not, but there's a competitor in there, right? So I think that's the first thing that I've tried to kind of eliminate. For me, it's a false narrative to say that, well, they're not competitive. They are competitive. I think it comes down to, number one, trying to figure out what are they competitive about. So for me, there are kids who are competitive about winning and losing, right? They are competitive about winning and losing. They want to win every single exercise, every single time in practice. They want to win every single game. And then there's kids who are competitive with, their school, right? Their academics. There's kids who are competitive with their relationships. There's kids who are competitive with their siblings and their family. And maybe there's a kid on the soccer field that is just competitive in having a good attitude that day, right? That they want to show up and they want to make somebody laugh, right? So I think for me, what are they competitive about? And then your last point is, how do you get those kids to be more competitive? I guess if I'm trying to get so-and-so to be as competitive as so-and-so, I'm doing them a disservice, right? I don't want them to be as competitive as somebody else. I want them to be as competitive as they possibly can be, right? So I don't want to compare them. I don't want them to feel like, well, Sally is very competitive. You need to be as competitive as her. I don't want them to feel that way, but I want them to feel like they can be as competitive as they can be. And I think a lot of it just comes down. I think it just comes down to, the dialogue and the relationship. I know we keep saying that, but like really understanding, first of all, why is the kid there? What are their goals, right? And I love to ask this question too, like, why are you here? Like, talk to me about what you want to do when you're on the field, for example, or what do you want to do within the framework of our culture? Like, what kind of a teammate do you want to be, right? Like, I love to ask those kinds of questions because it gives me insight into what they value. And if they value being a starter, or if they value just being a great teammate, that gives me a framework of how I can help them be better at that, for lack of better words, be more competitive about doing that, and helping them along the way and growth. But for me, it's all about the individual as far as that's concerned. Like, I know we talked about the framework and the collective, but when it comes down to that, like, I don't want someone to be as competitive as somebody else. I want them to be as competitive as they possibly can be. And again, dialogue and relationships, and there's framework and there's things that I think we try to do with our kids too, things that we get them to try to think about, like how they react to mistakes or how they do certain things. Like, that's all a part for us about being competitive. So how do you compete to be a better leader in our program? Like, this is what it may look like. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, I'm trying to think about how we can help the individual person maximize their ultimate potential. And it's all different. The levels of potential are different. Just like the levels of competitiveness are different. The levels of potential are different. And it's all about trying to get them to reach that, try to reach that level.
I really like the way you frame that as well. And I like the way that you say this, be as competitive as they can be, and therefore not comparing them with someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. In the way, as you said that, I was just reflecting upon a young person, which they've got a lot of potential for the future, but right now they're lacking that self-belief, they're lacking that motivation, they're lacking a lot of segments around these critical areas, which I want them to really achieve what they're able to achieve in life, because I know they have it within them. And I share that segment with you because I want them to be the best that they truly can be, because I know they've got the ability to do so. And I just want them to unlock it at the right time for them, which will open up many doors. Once they realize they have that opportunity, they'll then develop all the other attributes around that, hopefully, and they'll become more naturally competitive. They'll be more naturally confident because they possess all these skills at, say, a foundation level. They just haven't reached that self-belief, that confidence. They haven't had someone to push them to do that before. They haven't got a real mentor or role model in their lives, which they look up to all the time. And when they go into certain scenarios, they're shut down straight away, and therefore it chips away at them a little bit more. So I want them to really get to that place where I share that segment with you about that competitiveness and not comparing them to someone else, because I don't need to compare them to someone else, because I know it's within them individually. And the way that you and again, it comes down to my dialogue and how I build that over a period of time, and I'm consistent with them. And they're like, actually, Luca's approached me in this way with it, or Lucas keeps saying this, and therefore they're going to have that self-belief, hopefully build over that time. And they know they're going to have that relationship with me to then ask those questions, and we can develop that mentality over a period of time where it hasn't been an elite mentality, but how can we take it as near as possible and therefore allow them to explore options because of the work that we've been able to do at these foundation levels.
Yeah. I think this is something I love to do with kids, my players. And first of all, the fact that you have said to a kid that this is what I see in you. I know we talk about this all the time as coaches, but like the impact that has on somebody at that level, I think is massive. So the fact that you have told this young player that you're working with, this is what I see in you, I think that's huge. And I know it's a cliche. I know it is, right? Like I know people will even roll their eyes at it, but the fact that you can look at a young man or a young girl and say, look, this is what I believe you're capable of, that means everything to those kids, right? And I recall a story. We had a girl come in, you know, she ended up being a 4-year starter for us at the varsity level. So she came in as a freshman. But I'll tell you what, by her senior year, she turned into an absolutely competitive monster, right? She came in as a freshman and she was not like that, right? You could see it. Like you could see the moments and you could see the potential. And she came in and she was, you know, maybe 5'2" and maybe weighed 100 pounds and was like the smallest kid on every field that we played in every game. And, you know, we had a conversation her senior year and we were just talking about like how competitive she had been and like just the level she was playing at was unbelievable. And I asked her, I said, you know, let me be honest with you, like what changed? Like, where did this person come from? Like, you know, and I told her, I said, you know, I always saw it in you and I've been waiting for you to kind of, you know, catch up to what I've seen, like what happened. And she said, you know, it's nothing that's like specific, coach, but she said, I will say this, that my freshman year, when you told me you believed that I could be this kind of a player, that's when I started to change the way I tried to do things. Right. And so I think that you're expressing that to a player. I guess for me, I don't want you to underestimate the impact that potentially has on them. May not be right away. Like her freshman year, she was good, but she was not as good as she ended up being. Right. And so I think, you know, you may reap the benefits of that conversation and just that small comment. What she said to me, she said, you said something about just because you're small, and I was referring to her size, right, doesn't mean you have to play small. And she said that changed everything for me, right? Like that mentality of like, I can be competitive no matter how big she is, no matter how small I am, you know. And then by the time she was a senior, I mean, she was a monster, right? Like we knew every session that Julia was going to get in there and get after it and set the tone and be the guiding force and the example of what we wanted. And, you know, she said to me, whether I completely believe it or not, like that was the conversation that turned things around for her, right? The other thing too, not to talk too much, but the other thing that I love to do with kids, and I don't know if you know who Dan Abrahams is, right? Sports site guy over in the UK. Like he's a legend, right? I absolutely love Dan's stuff. He's done some work with our program. He's given me so much insight. Like I'm a huge fan, but he talks a lot about scaling, right? And talking to players and saying, you know, hey, you know, whatever. So I love to say things like this to my team or to a player, like, you know, what do you look like at your most competitive? Like when you are being the most competitive version of yourself, what do you look like? And I took that from Dan, right? And he talks about, you know, the fact that you've got to get kids to feel it and to like be able to visualize it, right? And so we talk a lot about, we use that a lot. Like I love saying to a kid, like, hey, you know, what's your competitive level today? Give me a number. You know, and then she'll say, oh, I was only a 2 today. Okay, well, why were you a 2 today? Like, where do you want to be? Well, I want to be a 5. Okay, well, why were you a 2 today? And then you let them open up and have that dialogue and have that space, right? And then, you know, his great line, I love this, is like, you know, it's not what does a 5 look like? It's what does a 2.5 look like tomorrow? Right? And so it gets them to really visualize, number one, what they look like when they're at what they're perceived best, right? I love that. I love that idea. And then when you talk to them about, you know, what level were you at today? Okay, why were you there? You know, well, what does 2.5 look like tomorrow? Then? Here's what I think 2.5 looks like for you tomorrow. it looks like this, and this, or maybe it just looks like that. And I think that's huge with kids. Like our girls, I think really like we'll start a session. Our girls come on in and we prime the session. We talk about what we're going to be doing, and we'll say, okay, what will we look like today at our most competitive as a group? And they talk about it and they share it. And then those are things that as a coach, whoa, girls, wait, I thought we said that if we were going to be at our most competitive, there was going to be a lot of communication. We were going to be loud and we were going to be encouraging. Where is that? Right. And so that allows me to have some accountability with them. Like, whoa, we said we were going to sprint out hard to every ball. Are we really sprinting as hard as we can? And so it allows you to have that dialogue and really those coaching points, right? I think is huge when you let them really visualize themselves, whether it's being competitive or intense or being positive or being a good teammate. Like, what do we look like when we're being the best teammate we can be? What do we look like? I think that's something that I love to do. It helps, I think, tremendously get those kids to see what they're capable of, but also what they need to work on and what they're doing well.
And you're developing so many skills within that, their critical thinking, their problem solving, their own personal analysis, their reflection. So there's even another layer within that, which I think is great in terms of that work and how you've approached it. But I love that question. What's your competitive level today? Something so simple can be taken to be such an important piece of work, and how you really build upon that, especially with a player, and then look at that visualization. How do they then reflect upon themselves? How are they feeling about it? How does that competitive environment feel? And that comment you made to that girl about her height and then comparing it to her performance, what a clever and very important way to piece something which she was able to visualize, reflect upon, and then build competitiveness from that, where you really saw the development and growth over a period of time, and that potential become unlocked from where she started to where she was, and how she had even more to bridge upon that. I think just shows how you piece that together within a framework, and then allows that to work from a relationship with the players that has developed the competitive edge, and therefore an environment that other players look upon, and how that pieces together for coaches and the questions which they can take away, and something that they can really ask their players when they're working with them.
Yeah, and I think, again, that conversation that I had with the girl that I mentioned earlier, it also came down to getting to know her as a person, like know what I could say to her that would get a response out of her, right? And, I jokingly say she had a little bit of a chip on her shoulder about her height, so I knew that if I were to say, hey, look, like just because people, say you're short doesn't mean that's how you have to play. I knew that would get some kind of a response out of her too. So I think it comes back again to, your comment earlier about the belief that you show in that young player that you're working with right now, and telling them, like, this is what I see in you. This is what I see in your potential. I think getting to know them and knowing, how you can motivate them a little bit, get them to look at things in a different way, I think is huge. And then the feedback, right? The conversation, hey, I've asked questions, hey, what's your this level today? Whether it's competitiveness or intensity, or what's your fatigue level today? And all of a sudden she's like, Coach, my fatigue level is like a 10 out of 5. And you're like, okay, what's going on? And so those conversations and that feedback opens up that dialogue, where you learn that, this girl's going through, her parents are separating, and you didn't know that because she's not going to share that with you, maybe, on her own. But the fact that you've asked that question, all of a sudden you now realize, holy cow, like this is what's going on. Or, she's not been eating well. She's not been sleeping well. Those are things that those conversations allow you to have. So I think it all comes back to those connections you try to make.
Absolutely, and I think that connection is really important. And just asking the simple question of how well did you sleep last night, even for a student who might be coming into school today, and they've come in, they might have gone to bed 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, so they've had a couple of hours sleep, they perhaps haven't had any breakfast, obviously they're tired, they're grouchy, and therefore their engagement, their reaction time is going to be very different. Their relationship and response is going to be very different throughout that day. So that cautious approach isn't always taken by some people, but I think just understanding where they're at within that day and how they might respond to you is important to go, actually their behavior isn't as normal as it usually is for them, and then whether normal exists is another question, but there is that sense of normality around it, and therefore if they're acting in a different way than usual. Therefore, it's because they've had X, Y, and Z factors. And do I need to change my approach to them today? Yes, I do. Am I undermining my own principles within that? Not particularly. I'm just being adaptable in terms of how I want to approach that, and there's a way about doing it. So I think that having that relationship at the core is absolutely essential. But asking key questions that can be so little, especially around the person-centered approach, is going to take you to a next level, which is really important. But for you, you're coaching players within this environment, especially in the US system, when I speak to a lot of coaches, they talk about having a 30-person squad. And I'm like, whoa, that's insane for us over here, because we would never even consider having a 30-person squad. And when we look at that competitive nature, especially with the way things are set up here in Wales, again, it's looking at fundamentals, it's looking at participation. So if I was to limit game time on players, I'd be held accountable for that very, very quickly in terms of the environment here, which is set up. But for yourselves in the US, do you think you're set up to be more competitive, and therefore players understand that? Because when you have these players and the squads that you have, and you look at selection, you look at dropping players, you look at how you're picking players, do you think the system benefits you and allows you to be competitive and to look at these environments because of the way it's been set up?
I think overall the answer to that question is yes, right? I think my perspective of youth soccer in the United States of America is unfortunately, it's very result driven, right? So I think from, the littlest grassroots team to, an ECNL team, at the highest club level in America, unfortunately, I think it is result driven. I think there is a disconnect, right? Do I think it benefits me as a coach that, the kind of the unspoken mentality in the United States of America is that we want to win everything and that we're results driven. Honestly, I don't think I've ever really thought about that. But just in this quick moment, I mean, yeah, it doesn't hurt, right? That the overall mentality over here in the States is that we want to win. I think, maybe that, it does allow us some, for lack of better words, leeway, that our parents, for example, right, our players know that we're here to win. So I think it does. I think it gives you maybe a little bit of a card in your back pocket. You can say, hey, like, we're all about that competitiveness and we're all about those results. But I hate that. Like, I hate it as a coach. The more I think about that, that we are so results driven over here. Like, I've tried to change a lot, as I'm sure, all coaches do. And I used to be all about the competitiveness, right? Like, I wanted to win everything. And I jokingly tell the kids all the time, like, I'm the most competitive person here in this program. I'm more competitive than all of you are. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but at least that's what I say. But I've tried to change my approach that, we still want to win. Make no mistake about that. Like, our program here at Notre Dame Academy, when I first got hired, my athletic director, Gary Snyder, absolutely unbelievable guy to work for. He was very clear that he wanted us to be one of the best programs in the area and the state. And so with that, you have to win and you have to get results and you have to show things on the field. And, that was what we were really all about, was let's get out there and let's try to win everything and let's be competitive all the time. And then we realized, at least I realized somewhere along the way, that the byproduct of what we try to do every day, the work rate, the attitude, those virtues that you heard me mention earlier, the byproduct of that was winning. Right. And so I try to focus more on we're not going to go into a game saying we have to win anymore. We're going to go into a game and say we have to try and reach our level of expectation, right? How we believe that we want to play, how we want to try and do things, obviously tactically, principles of play, game model, all those things, right? Like, we want to try and do that to the best of our ability, but we also want to control the things that we know can at least put you in a better situation to win. It may not guarantee that you do win, but we're going to try to control the controllables. And I think that's where, instead of trying to say to a team now, like, I used to say this when I first took over, is that we need to do, this, and this. We've got to win the set piece battle. We've got to win the 50-50s. We've got to do this or that. It's more of like, we've got to control our attitude, our mindset, our how we come back from mistakes when things don't go our way. So, in a roundabout way, do I think the competitive mindset helped us helps us here? Yes, I do. But it is something that like less and less I focus on. Like I'm not about wins and losses as much as I am, can we maximize our potential, right? Every year, my goal as a coach is, and I write this down in my planning session, my book is, what can we do to maximize this group's potential? And then the byproduct of that, we've been very, blessed to be successful, and we've won titles, and we've been, ranked, and we've had All-Americans come through our program, right? Because of that. And I believe it's because we try to control the things that we know we need to control to give us the best chance to win.
And when you look at those controllables, you look at all those other aspects and those considerations. Are they all things that you prepare for during your preseason, during the season, off the field, and how you approach that with your players within the program?
Yeah, so we talk about that a lot, right? Like our core value is expect the best, right? So when I first took over the program here, and my athletic director, we had that conversation. He said, like, right now, we've got some really talented kids, but we're kind of mediocre, right? And so when I kind of talked to some of the girls who were going to be seniors and girls who had been in the program, I think the thing that they kept coming back to was like they knew that they were good, but they weren't ever expected to. And I say this lightly because of obviously I'm not trying to, but they weren't expected to be good, right? Does that make sense? And so my assistant coach at the time, we were talking on the phone one night, and he's like, look, it just comes down to this. It's really simple. We got to expect to be the best. Expect the best. And so we talked about how, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean to expect? First of all, we expect to be the best program in the area. So now we're going to play like it. We're going to train like it. We're going to approach like it. We expect to be the best teammates. So here's how we do that, right? And so we talk about that all the time, right? We have a lot of classroom sessions and culture sessions, we call them. We sit down and we ask the girls that question too, like, what will it take for you guys as a group to maximize your potential? And so allowing them to talk about it, I do a lot of off-season stuff with our seniors, our girls that are going to be seniors the next year. And I talk about, what are the three things that, you think we need to commit to? And so they'll come up with, three things like we got to commit to this year's group. I think is fantastic. Like we need to commit to upholding a high level of competition, right? They want to commit to being inclusive with everybody, right? So we talk about those things, and every year, our goal every year as a program is to maximize our potential. And so we talk about what that takes and what does that look like too, right? Like on the daily, we'll get ready to start a session, and Erin Webb, my assistant coach that I mentioned earlier, she'll say, all right, girls, how do we maximize our potential today? And then they talk about it. Right. And so I think it's a conversation, but we certainly talk about like, what does it mean to expect the best? And we give the backstory, and, our girls who've been in the program, for a few years, they kind of roll their eyes at that story because they've heard it so many times, but it's really about the expectations, and we lay it out there and, talk about what they want to accomplish as a group and how we get there. So we definitely do a lot of talking about those things for sure.
And even when you get a new player through the door, even just asking that question, how do we maximize our potential today? That's something they may never have been asked before, and they therefore might not even realize what potential is. And then it's developing around that work and their inner ability to understand what their potential is, how that looks, and visualizing that towards the future and unlocking that around, the more experienced players and taking that away to the next level. So that importance around the mentality again is so important, and I think what you do off the field is really going to reflect what you do on the field, hence why you've had those results. But really then looking at how the players go off and make decisions in life as well is an even bigger impact, and shows the importance of the program and what the school is doing, and then what you do as a teacher / coach, and how you build those relationships with players which are long lasting through how you develop such a natural framework which is really player centric, with non-negotiables and principles built within that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you said player-centric, and I think that at the end of the day, like this is all about the player, right? Like we have to step back as coaches, and it's not necessarily about us, right? So my question is, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, every year is how can I maximize this group's potential, and then within that, okay, how can I maximize this kid's potential? How can I maximize that coach's potential? How can I help this person become even better? I always use the word even better, right? Like not better, because they're good at something, right? Everybody's good at something. So it's like, okay, but how can I make them even better at this or even better at that? And so those are things that, I think a lot about. We as a staff talk a lot about. Like we talk a lot about individual players, right? Like how can we help so-and-so be more competitive, right? Or be a better leader, So those are conversations that we continue to have, because at the end of the day, it all funnels back to the kid, as you know. And we're just trying to, just help them along the journey, right? If I can have a kid say to me at the end of 4 years here that I think I'm a better player in person for being in your program, then that's a win, right? That's a win. That's bigger than any win that you're going to get or any medal that you're going to get to wear around your neck. So that's where it all comes back for us, is how can we help these kids be the best version of themselves?
Absolutely, I completely agree, and I think that's such an important question, the way that you piece that together as well, which is, again, holding yourself accountable in that process, even by how can I unlock this group's potential, and even take away those individuality considerations, individual considerations. But when you have a squad and you have maybe a handful of really competitive players, they're your real technical players. They're the players which have, this potential to reach an elite environment, that capacity, but you run the risk of losing them because of the group that you have, and they're maybe looking at other options to be in that environment which they feel is more elite to them, for example, because they feel that they may not be surrounded by the players which they want to be surrounded by. And we know we get players like this who maybe think the grass is greener and it really isn't. But when you have that potential where players could be leaving, is it difficult then to try and hold yourself to a point where you really want to keep these players, or it's a case of, do you know what, it's actually better that these players move on, or do you run the risk of trying to keep the players and upset the balance in the team? How do you sort of approach that sort of dynamic and situation?
Yeah, so actually a mom of a student I had when I first started teaching, probably 20 years ago, right? I remember we had a parent-teacher conference. And, a classroom is a lot like a team, right? You've got your higher level kids in the classroom, for lack of better words, and you've got kids who, need to be raised up a little bit. And I remember she said something to me, and I always believe this is just don't lower the hoop, right? Don't lower the hoop. You'll lose the kids that are here if you lower the hoop, right? And so for me, when we have, that dynamic within a squad where you've got sort of that, that group that's maybe up here, and then the girls who are close, I'm a firm believer that you never lower the hoop, right? Ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take those other girls and move them closer to where the hoop is at. And I think what you'll do is you will lose those higher level kids if you try to accommodate the other ones, right? And again, I think it goes back to, so when you look at these, you look at the dynamic and you say, okay, we need this player, and this player to get closer to the hoop. It's those conversations again, like, this is what I believe you can do. Like, you can get closer. Here's how you can get closer, right? And so I think that's the first thing. If a kid wants to leave our program for greener pastures, for lack of better words, I have a lot of reasons why the grass is greener. Sometimes it's been fertilized in things that are, don't necessarily smell great. But that's okay, right? Like, at the end of the day, we're not for everybody. And if a kid wants to, move on to what they perceive to be a higher level of, competition, for example, like, that's okay too. Like, again, I want kids to be in a situation where they feel like they can be challenged. I like to think that we do a really good job of that here. If they don't want to be here, that's okay. Like, no hard feelings, right? Like, go be you and go do you. But I think as far as handling the dynamic within our team, we're not going to lower the hoop for anybody, right? And the girls know that. You either rise to the challenge, right? Or, other players are going to play in front of you. Like, it's that simple. Right. But we're not going to lower the hoop for anybody. But at the same time, like, I get it. Like, if you think that you want more of a challenge, I hope you go there and I hope you get more of a challenge, because I want the best for you. But at the same time, I like to think that nobody does it better than us in the area, right? There's some wonderful programs in this area that do an unbelievable job. I don't think anybody does it better than us. So we're just trying to, again, maximize the potential of the individual, the group, and try to make things as competitive as possible and in a high level. And again, go back to that best experience possible so that the girls know that they're being pushed, they're being challenged, they're being cared about. But if they want to move on, that's okay, right? Like, I'm not going to beg a kid to stay and play, right? I want the best for them. So if they think it's somewhere else, I hope that's what they get.
And when it comes down to that, again, you talked about that potential of accommodating those players. And I think once you try to accommodate everyone, which you can't do, you start to compromise yourself in that situation because you are lowering that hoop. So the way that you say about moving the other players to the hoop and not lowering it,
Yep.
I think doesn't compromise you, but it sets that standard and that accountability for the other players to realize what they must do to achieve and maximize the situation which is in front of them. And it's up to them to make their own decision on a basis of that.
Yeah. And again, the conversation is, why are you here? On the field, what do you want to accomplish? Okay, well, this is where that hoop is at. This is where you are right now. How do we bridge the gap? How do we help you get to there? Right. And again, it's that dialogue, it's that scaling, it's that conversation, it's understanding what they want to accomplish, why they're there. Letting them have the space to talk about it with you, I think, is huge as well. Right. And again, but you're right. I'm not going to compromise the standards of our program. The standards of the players who've come before, who have upheld those standards. I tell the girls this all the time, like, we're not gonna do things differently just because, like, we owe it to the girls who've come before us, to the coaches that come before us, to maintain this level of expectation that we have set forward, for ourselves. So we're not going to change it, right? We're not going to change those expectations. We may change how we do it. We may change how we interact with kids, and we've changed. My assistant coaches tell me all the time, like, you are such a different coach than you were 4 years ago. And I'm like, good. I hope so. Like, I hope I'm not the same coach that I was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I hope I'm not the same coach I was a year ago. Right. I hope I'm different. Because that means I'm trying to evolve and learn. And again, I'm trying to evolve and learn so that I can help maximize the potential of these kids that are under my care. And the coaches that are coaching with me too. So you're not going to change it, but we're going to try our best to do it better.
I think that is always a good place to be, because if someone comes in and they're in a position where they can see that they have become better as a person, better as a player, better as an individual, and the program has, gradually become better as well in certain aspects, whether, that player approach, what you do off the pitch is on the pitch. And, there's all little segments which you can take away. You are having that impact. You are doing that job which you are really, designed to do. And you're looking to approach what that potential is just by being better. And, by those little habits which you're going to incur every day and what you do off the pitch is certainly going to help you in terms of that approach and the outcomes that you'd like to achieve.
Yeah. One of my assistant coaches, Erin Kilmeyer, we call her EK, she really brought in something new. This is just her second year coming back this season, but she brought in the idea and talked a lot with me about, being intentional, right? The intentionality of every day. And that's something that she has talked with, she works with our goalkeepers. And so she talks a lot with the goalkeepers about being intentional with what you're going to do today. Like, here's what we're going to do today as goalkeepers, let's say, for example, or even as a team, right? Here's what we're going to work on today. This is our topic. What specifically do you want to focus on in terms of your improvement? And having kids verbalize that. And, in those moments, like, where they're not directly involved in the activity, hey, what's your focus for today? And hearing them, and knowing that they're going to be asked those questions. I think she's done an unbelievable job of reminding us, even me, as a coach, just being intentional with whatever it is you're doing for today. And I think that's where those small growths come from that you just mentioned, right? Those small growths come from being intentional, knowing kind of what you want to work on. And sometimes, we have in the past where we'll get ready to go to a training session and, we'll say, okay, here's what we're working on today. Let's have you write down 2 things you want to focus on today. And then do me a favor, before you leave, find a buddy, find a partner, share that with them. And now you two are now responsible for holding each other accountable for that. So if you know that, Bella wants to be more focused and more positive today, okay, then Amanda, your job is to look after her and make sure that she is being positive, helping her get through those negative moments. If she's not being focused, like, hey, Bella, we got to be focused in this moment. So we've even done things where we've paired them off together, and this is kind of like your accountability partner for the day, right? And your job is to help her work towards those things that she wants to focus on for today. And it's been awesome. You hear them walking off during a water break, and they're like, hey, you said you wanted to do this. Like, have you thought about trying to do that? And those are other ways that you can help build improvement within your team, I think.
Again, you build that social aspect, you build those relationships. The players hold themselves accountable then, and then they're developing that critical analysis. They're developing reflection points. They're looking at how they bridge that together and what they do as a team and as a group. So then once you have those move from pairs into a group dynamic, you end up generating a really good conversation, which brings out a lot of learning objectives within that. So you're not only looking at the technical side, but you're looking at the cognitive learning and how that pieces together. And then that's the bigger picture things, which brings everything aligned in terms of how these players bridge themselves in what they do off the pitch, on the pitch. There's team dynamic, which improves over that, their technical ability, their understanding, their game IQ. And then once one player says something to the other, this other player may never have thought about what one player just said to them. And then once this teammate has said it to them, they might take that away a bit more than what a coach might say to them because of the relationship which they have with their peers. So you're hitting all the elements in terms of all the blocks which you have from the success which you're having and that approach with the players. So when you piece this together and the coach comes in to observe and would come into Chip's program, they're all, green segments for me right across the board, because it's all the great things which you're doing, which other coaches may not be thinking of, but has allowed you to really develop and push these players to the next level, which has been really interesting insight.
Yeah. First and foremost, we certainly don't claim to reinvent a wheel, right? And we know that there's so many unbelievable coaches in our area, in the state, in the all across, that are doing these kinds of things already, right? But we just try to do things with in mind the kids, right? And how we can help them do whatever they want to do while they're here, right? And so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to claim that we are, doing something that other people aren't, but we do what we think works for us, right? And so the one thing that works for us is conversation and getting kids to I think, see and really, really feel and believe what they're capable of doing, and then having a high level of expectation and a high standard. So I think within those things, you find out what works for you. You find out, how you can build those relationships, and then you just hold it to a high standard and make sure that the kids who've been in it and who have come before you, right? They're the ones that lead the way. And we're blessed to have so many great kids who have come in and have helped uphold the traditions and the standards of how we try to do things. And so we're gonna try to get better every year. And how we do things as coaches and, the way we interact with our players. But we think that we try to do things the right way. So that's most important.
And so for you, when you plan a training session or deliver a training session, How does a training session look, and what's your typical sort of layout or structure of a session?
Yeah, so that was my favorite question that you asked me, right? Because it really got me thinking about, okay, if I'm saying that we want this to be competitive, right? And I made some notes. I'm going to refer to my notes here too. How do we make things competitive? I think first and foremost for me, when I think about it, it starts with what's the topic, right? So what are we working on for today? So let's say we're going to be working on defending 1v1 or small group, whatever, right? So the first thing that I'm going to look at is I'm going to ask myself, okay, here's what we're working on. Here is the conversation, the topic for today. The first thing I want to ask myself is, what are the competitive elements within that topic, right? Within that situation. So for example, if we're working on 1v1 defending for the day, where do the competitive elements occur, right? So for example, obviously it would be a 50-50 tackle, right? So there's a loose ball, two players are going for it, 50-50, being competitive enough to get your nose stuck in there. Like we always say too, in those moments, right? Like we don't care if you win that ball. We don't care if you win the 50-50, but by God, you better go in there and try to win it. Right. So where's the competitive moment? Is it, 50-50s? Is it shielding back to goal? Not letting her bounce you off the ball? Is it, 1v1 in an open field, you're making sure that, the old saying, the ball gets by you, but the player doesn't, right? Or the player gets by you, but the ball doesn't. So it's where do those competitive moments occur, right? And then from there, for me, let's say it's crossing and finishing. Okay. So if it's crossing and finishing, if I'm focusing on the attacking players, competitive moment for me would be beating your man into the space, beating your man to the ball. So we focus on that. How do you beat your player to the ball, off the shoulder, get on their blind side, then come across. I mean, all kinds of things that you can teach the competitive moment. Like, you've got to be first to the ball. Here's how you do it. Or if you're working on the defenders, okay, here's how you stop the cross, right? Those are competitive moments for me. So first of all, it's what's the topic, and then identifying the competitive moments within that topic, right? So when we're looking through those topics and those creative moments or those competitive moments, then we try to design what we do in the practice to bring those things out, right? So if it's 1v1s, then right away, what are we doing? We're doing 1v1s, right? We're doing 1v1s to goal. If we're looking for, 50-50 balls, then it's how we deliver a ball into the session. Like, where does the ball start, right? Does the ball need to get played in? Does the kid come in with the dribble, with the ball at her feet? So we're talking about all those things, like how can we design the exercise to bring out the competitiveness, right? So that's kind of where we start. And then from there, I tell my coaches two things at every session you should do first is, number one is you should be positive. So the first thing that should come out of a coach's mouth, in my opinion, during a session is the positive, right? So I always write down in my notes, always to myself, and I've been doing this now for, almost 25 years in Toledo. And I did this when I was a young coach. I was not very good at it when I was a young coach, but it was always to praise what you want. Like, if I want that kid to put her head down and put her nose down and go hard into a tackle, well, then when she does it, I better praise it. So the first thing I tell my coaches is be positive, right? Be positive with what you're saying. Praise what you want, right? So if we want our girls to get up, off their feet and challenge for a 50-50, again, they may not win it, but praising the attempt is massive, right? Look, I love how you went up for that ball. I know you didn't win it, but your attitude to go up and compete and challenge for that ball is huge, right? So first of all is praise it. And then secondly is to coach it, right? Like, the first thing for me is coach the character side of the game. Like, if your kids aren't competing, if they're not working, if they're not being industrious, like, before you ever break down body shape in a 1v1, right? Coach the effort to get out and close a ball down, right? And one of the things that we always talk about a lot in our sessions is, I think there's a really bad question sometimes that coaches ask, and I know I did when I was a coach, is, you ask a question like, hey, are you guys working hard? Or are you guys competing hard? And I think that's a really bad question. And I think the better question that I've learned is, when you do it, is, instead of asking, are we working hard? The question really is, are we working as hard as we can? Or are we competing as hard as we can? Right? Are we leading as best we can? Right? And so we talk a lot about that. So, first of all, is coach that, and I will always say, I'll be standing there watching an exercise and, or whatever. And, somebody might be, off the field, not involved directly. And I might just whisper to her, say, hey, are you competing as hard as you can right now? And she might be, but I want her to always be thinking about that, right? Like, I want her to think, like, is there a different level in me? Like, can I really crank this up a little bit? Or, hey, was that really your best effort? And it might be, and it might be like her absolute best effort, but I want our kids also thinking and believing in themselves that there is always a different level. And so that's the other part of it, is praise the positive, praise what you want, and coach the character first. And then we can worry about body shape. And then we can worry about, pressure cover and all those things, or, our body angle to a ball to close a cross down. Like, but for me, it's character first. Like, the character side of the game is more important than anything else. So that's kind of how it starts with us.
I love the way that you have so many questions within that and the way that you piece that together, because as you were writing that, I've added so much to my notes here because there's so much to really take away and to reflect upon. But those two things which you say, first, you should be positive, and second, praise what you want, and then coach that. And then are we working as hard or competing as hard as we can, and coach that as the fundamental. I think that really opens up a lot of elements before getting into those technical abilities, because unless you've got competitiveness, unless you're praising and giving positiveness to players, then they're not going to believe themselves to really push themselves on those technical levels when they need to push for it further. So if you flip it round from, if you had technical first and then player center, once you flip it round the other way, you're going to get more results. And I've always believed in that. And everything that I do, especially when I teach within my classroom as well, it's all about how my students enter the room, how they're feeling within the room, how the environment and dynamic is before I get into the content of it, because I need to understand how it's going to feel and look within the room to know how I'm going to adapt and approach across it before the content comes out. And therefore I get the outcomes that I'd like to get from that, rather than going, right, these are my principles, this is what we're going to do today, and you're going to do it regardless. So for me, I flip it the other way around, and some other teachers have it the other way, and that's all right because everyone's got their own approach. But I'm always a big believer in that person-centered first, even in my coaching, even in teaching as well. So once I have it that way, I've seen a lot of success and results come how I want them to come, because the individuals are responding to that situation, to the dynamic, to the environment that's been created, to the relationship that I have with them. And it sounds very similar in terms of how you're approaching that with your players and the individuals you have in front of you.
Yeah, agreed. I think, for me, the first thing I want to know about a group of kids, a new team, because every year for us at the high school level, right, every year the team is new. It's a different group of people because your seniors graduate, they go off, right? And then you have a new group of people come in. And so every year it's different, right? So, and that's what I love about high school soccer. I love high school sports because every year it's a new group of people. And the challenge is to put the puzzle together, right? Mm-hmm. But the first thing I want to know about a group is what kind of character do I have? Like what's the group's character, right? And so for me, the only thing I care about, obviously we talk about principles of play and, how we want to do things. Like, I'm not saying that we don't do that. But the very first thing I want to know is what kind of a character am I working with here, right? I want to know what this group's moxie is, like what their makeup is, like when it gets hard, how are they going to respond? And so we put them in things that are not easy, right? And we'll put them through things that are difficult. And it's not because we want to expose anybody's weaknesses. We just want to find out what we're already good at, and then how we can, what we need to be even better at. The other thing I forgot to mention too, when I was talking about, praising the positive, and I don't know where I read this, and I don't know if somebody told me this, but one of the things that really turned the light bulb on for me too is be specific, right? Be specific with your feedback. So if you like something that somebody did, tell them exactly what it was that they did that you liked, right? Like, I love the fact, let's say we're doing 1-to-1 defending again, hey, Katie, I love the fact that your first 3 steps, you exploded out of your stance, right? And I love that you ran as hard as you could and you took a great angle to the ball versus just saying, hey, great job, Katie, good job. Like being more specific, especially with youth kids, I think is huge, right? I love how you were side on when you were shielding, you were using your elbow as that third arm or your, whatever, and just really, really pushing. I mean, being specific with your feedback when kids do things the right way and also when you're correcting them. Is huge, but I'm not a fan anymore of that sort of that blanket praise of, hey, good job, everybody. Like, what was good about what they just did? And if they know that, then they're going to be more likely to, I think they're going to be more likely to do 2 things. Number one is do it again, but also see it in others. And I think that becomes huge.
I absolutely agree. And I think, again, once it becomes huge and they realize they can do it again, that's where the confidence will build upon it. So I've definitely seen that in players that I've had, and I've been able to give them praise, and they've perhaps never done something in a game environment before. And then suddenly I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. It's amazing because you're able to be this player because of your acceleration and your speed allows you to do this. And then therefore you contributed towards us getting into the final third. And so a little thing like that, then the player's going to be more explosive and they're going to push themselves to keep doing it. Yeah. And therefore it's like, actually, right, that's in our locker now. What else can we build into our locker so you're not predictable every week? And therefore you start to develop the all-round player. So that's where the real coaching element comes in. And I think that's where the real fun of it is, because you start to see that player grow over that period of time because of the work that's being put in.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, I mean, again, I know I've said this before, but like I coach some amazing kids at this school, right? Like they are all here because they want to be here. They want to be great. And then what I've found is, when you praise the things that they're doing well, all of a sudden they want to master it, right? They want to be the best that they can be at it, right? And it goes back to our conversation earlier. If they know the things that they're capable of and that they're doing well, now I want to be like excellent at it. I want to be elite at it, right? And then if then all of a sudden they want to be elite at other things too, right? So yeah, I can strike a ball with my right foot, but I want to be able to do it now with my left foot too. You know what I mean? And I think it gives them motivation and fuel to improve when you're being very specific about the things you see them doing that are good. It's human nature. Like, coach says I'm good at this. I want to be really, really good at this now. And I think it gives them a drive and a motivation and also specific things to work on.
Absolutely. And I think once they have those specifics and they understand it, then it's about how they can really take that into their own stride to know what commitment they have to make off the pitch to really then apply it within training. So it again comes down to that confidence where they want to try something, and then you have that environment where they can be able to learn from it within that training exercise, because you might have a lot of players and they're like, actually, I don't want to do this because I don't want to get it wrong in front of the coach. I don't want to get it wrong around my teammates. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what training's for. So once you change that dialogue and understand the relationship and create that dynamic where they're allowed to make mistakes within training, then you overcome the hurdles which they're presenting themselves and create an environment where it's all about that player development, because they're no longer going to be afraid of making mistakes.
Yeah. And I think, that's what you just said too, is the environment. It's tough to balance sometimes the environment where it's ultra competitive, but also an environment where the girls are comfortable and feel safe enough to express themselves and make mistakes. And, we talk a lot about that too, that, this is what we say, like we'll lose a tough game or we'll draw a tough game or whatever, and the girls, they'll hear me say this, like, we always say every game is a lesson. Every training session is a lesson, right? And within those lessons, as we all know, sometimes we make mistakes and things don't go our way, right? That's not failure. That's not failure. It's not failure that you've lost. It's not failure that you didn't play as well as you wanted to. The failure lies in not learning from the lesson, right? So for me, it's like every game is a lesson. What did we learn today? Okay, we learned this. We got to be tighter on set pieces, right? We got to come out with more energy in the first 5 minutes. Okay, then the expectation is that we learn from that. So the next time we play, the next time we're in sessions working on things, we're going to be tighter on set pieces. We're going to be tighter man to man. We're going to come out with a better energy tomorrow at practice than we did in the game today, right? So the failure is not that you can't do the core verse, right? It's not the fact that you fell over the ball, right? It's, why did you make the mistake? Helping them understand why they made the mistake. And then just saying to them that the expectation that you have moving forward is that they just simply try to learn from it. Right. And helping them through those things and understanding that the mistakes are okay, but it's not okay to not learn from your mistakes. That's my opinion, and that's kind of the mentality that we try to drive home with the girls.
I think, again, the way that you put that together and the way that comes across is really important, because helping them learn from their mistakes and failure is not X, Y, and Z. That is how you're going to truly help the players understand. And that is what's important on, because, you might have some coaches which go, you've done this wrong. This is wrong because of this or that. Actually, well, we made the mistake and how can we improve it? And again, it comes down to that dialogue and that approach, which can have that big difference upon a player and that impact within them as well. So I think once we bridge this together and the whole conversation which we've had now for the last hour and a half, I think this hour and a half has been truly fascinating to listen to, and for anyone else to listen to, because there's so much which we've unpacked within this, especially for that player development piece, which is so important and takes so much away within that, whereby it's the amount of notes I've made off it has been unreal, because there's so many learning outcomes from this alone, whereby if you apply it to your players, then you're going to have a fantastic reflective learning experience as a coach, as an individual, once you start to apply it with your players even further.
Yeah, and I think when I first started coaching, I was all about winning, and I was all about the competitive side of the sport. And, I wanted to make sure that when someone said, hey, Chip Smith, he wins. And I think what I've realized is that the best part of coaching is just getting those kids to be who they want to be, right? And who they're trying to be. I don't always get that right. I've made mistakes. I've let kids down. I know that. But at the same time, That's been the fun, right? Like the best part of my day is when one of my kids will pop their head in and say, "Hey, coach, what's up?" And I think that's very, we all can relate to that, I think, as coaches. But for me, it's, how can we just maximize a kid's potential? How can we help them be the best version of themselves? And sometimes it's not all kid gloves, and it's not all rainbows and sunshine either. Like sometimes you got to have very frank conversations with people, but I think if we can get them to envision what they're capable of, and try to help them move towards that, then that's the true beauty. And the real fun for me in coaching is taking a kid and saying, look, like that kid was here 3 weeks ago. Look at her now. Or that kid is a freshman when she was a senior. Now she's just a complete monster, right? Like that for me has been the really rewarding stuff that I get to do.
I love that. And I love the way that you've pieced that together, and especially how you've brought this all together through a learning journey over the time that we've been speaking for, Chip. And, it's been great to, again, hear about what you do in your program, but how you have that approach and how, again, you've had such open and honest reflections in terms of what you've done as a young coach to what you're doing now. And even building upon that, I think that's so important. And then that humbleness which comes in terms of when you've admitted to something, I think is again something that other coaches and individuals can learn from, because it can be so hard as coaches for us to admit to when we've made mistakes and to hold our hands up. We don't really want to do that. We try to shy away from it at times because again, we're in that position of accountability where we might not want to be held accountable for it, but we don't also want to admit to the mistakes as well, because we don't want to be seen in a frame or light where that has happened. But that's where that humility comes from, and how that has definitely been so true in that person-centered approach and what makes you approachable with those players. But we've been talking now and covered in so much content within this. It'd be great to throw some quick fire questions at you to finish the podcast on.
Yeah.
So some quick fire questions. If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
So if I was described in 3 words, if someone were to describe me in 3 words, well, okay, I would say appropriately sarcastic, hardworking, and probably a little bit mischievous at times.
I love that. What a great 3 words. I've never had those combinations before, so I love that. And again, I think that's so personable, which is really great. If you could move to any country to coach, what country would it be?
Spain. I've been to Spain. Unbelievable country. Madrid, Barcelona, the coast on the sea. I would be there in a heartbeat. I'm going to call Todd Bean and say, Todd, you got any room for you over there at Tobo? I would do it in a heartbeat.
I love that. What a great country to choose as well. Yeah. Great weather. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
Wow, what a great question. If I could spend a day with any coach or manager, I would probably say my old high school coach who recently passed away, right? Just again, to kind of looking back on it, I think some of the things that he did are some of the things that I've ended up doing, right? So I think I'd like to know, was that intentional? Like, what was your rationale behind why you had us do this kind of stuff? Because I do think that his demeanor and how he tried to approach us definitely molded me as a coach. So I think I'd like to spend the day just so I could, like, as a high school kid, you never asked your coach those questions, right? Like, why are we doing this, coach? I'd like to know, like, what was the why behind his intentionality? Yeah.
I love that. And again, so personable, which is great. Who was or is your role model?
My mom, single mother, grew up without, dad was not in the picture at all. So she had to wear both hats. Unbelievable woman, role model. I think she's molded me into how I try to treat people, right, and how I try to do things towards people. And then, I'll throw a shout out there to my wife too, who's an incredible person, obviously, as well. Those two together are like the perfect role model for me.
I love that. Again, the personability is absolutely up there. So I definitely love those ones for sure. If you had the choice of any job in the world, whether that be outside of sport or in sport, what job would it be?
Yeah. So if I could, I would coach full time in a heartbeat. I would love to be a full-time professional coach. In particular, not necessarily like a first team coach or even a manager though. Like, I would really love to kind of focus on more behind the scenes, like the psychology side of it, right? The motivational side of it. Like, how do we really, motivate players? Like what's their motivations too? And just kind of working with them on the more of the mental framework side. I mean, looking back on it, I love education, which is a lot of it. I would have loved to have been involved in like sports performance or sports psychology.
Interesting. Definitely. Something which really interests me the most is the sports psychology behind it, a bit more over the technical side of things.
For sure.
If you weren't coaching or teaching, what would you be doing?
I would jokingly say I would be trying to sing. I would be trying to be a musician, even though I probably have no musical talent whatsoever. I love music. I love to sing. My daughter somehow, thank God, from my mom, I think, got the musical genes. So we love to sing in the car. I love listening to her sing. So I would probably be trying to fancy myself as some kind of a musician, which I clearly am not. But it would certainly be fun trying.
Oh, that's such a nice answer, and you never know, the music career might be out for you.
I don't know about that. That would be a tall order, but who knows? Someday maybe.
Who knows? Who is your all-time favorite player?
Ooh, all-time favorite player, Paul Scholes.
Oh, good
Scholes,
choice.
Yeah, unbelievable. I'm a huge Man United fan. Go United. Let's beat Brighton today. Paul Scholes by far. I loved watching him play as a kid. When I was growing up in the States, we didn't see a lot of Premier League games, and the ones that we did were usually Manchester United, right? So as soon as the game would come in, I'd pop the VHS in, I'd push record. I used to watch Scholesy all the time. I still think he's arguably the greatest midfielder of all time, but I might be a little Manchester United biased. But Paul Scholes.
So if you're that professional coach full-time and you've been coaching for years, you now have two offers on the table at the same time. You can only take one or the other, and this is your once-in-a-lifetime offer. They're not coming back to you. United come and approach you and offer you the job, and then the US national team at the same time realizing that they want you as well. Which one are you taking?
I'm going with United, hands down. I'll get on the first flight out. It wouldn't even be really a choice. It's what made me fall in love with soccer, watching them play, right? Watching the game over here in the States, watching Manchester United. So it's been a struggle, the last few years, as you know, but still a Red Devil at heart, and I would take that job in a heartbeat.
Top choice.
Yeah.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve. One of my biggest pet peeves, I have two, is number one, people who are woe is me. Woe is me. Like, I get it. We all go through things, but we got to sometimes just buck on. And then number two pet peeve is people who leave trash behind. Right? Just clean up after yourself. You dropped it, pick it up. Even if it's not yours, just pick it up and throw it away.
I'm massive on that.
Yeah.
Especially when you say to a child, "Oh, do you mind just picking that up?" But it's not mine.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Just look after the environment.
Actually, it just happened last week. So we were, I do a lunch duty here, right? And somebody had left something on a table, and I said, "Hey, so-and-so, could you pick it up for me?" She's like, "Well, it's not mine." And I was like, "But it is your school, right?"
Yeah.
And then she was like, "Oh," and she grabbed it and picked it up and threw it away. So
same page, honestly, same page.
Yeah.
If you had to give one top tip to any coach, what would it be?
My number one piece of advice as a coach would be try to make sure you're doing the things that you're asking your players to do. Don't be a hypocrite. I've made mistakes. I know I've been a hypocrite before, but I do honestly try. If I'm going to ask my kids to learn from their mistakes, I'm going to try and learn from my mistakes. If I'm going to try and, if I'm going to ask my kids to be positive, I'm going to try and be positive. I'm going to work hard, then I'm going to try and work hard. So I would say do the things that you're going to ask your kids to do.
I love that one. I think that's so important, especially to hold yourself in terms of that position, that accountability as well. And what you ask of others, you should be willing to do as well, and not too much of others. What does reflection mean to you?
I don't think I really, first of all, I never claimed to be a great coach, but I don't think I've become a better coach until I really started to sit down and think about coaching. Right. And so for me, conversations like this, like I've taken away things that you've said today, right? I've made some notes as well, right? So I'm going to be going home and thinking about how I can take this conversation, for example, and improve to be better for our players. So these kinds of things for me is where I feel like I've really grown as a coach. Like, I love the idea of coaching. I think it is an unbelievable calling. It's an unbelievable blessing. It's hard. Right. It's hard. But for me, having a chance to talk about coaching with people like you, number one, it's fun. I love it. Number two, it's a chance to get better. And I think, I try to live my life by just trying to be better than I was yesterday. Right. And so it gives me a chance to go home and reflect and think about, some of the things I said, and some of the things obviously that you said that were quite insightful, and hopefully be able to steal from it, and borrow it and use it and become better for it, and help our kids become better for it.
Absolutely. I love that. Definitely. What are your non-negotiables?
Team first. So don't let your individual priorities get in the way of the team, even though those individual priorities are important. Number two is we will work hard. That's our second core value, right? So first one is expect the best. Number two is we will work hard. Like, we're going to work hard. And then I think non-negotiables is be grateful, right? Be grateful for the fact that you're here. Be grateful for the fact that you are given this opportunity, because it's really on the backs of other people, right? Other people have given our kids in the program currently the opportunities that they have. So be grateful for that. Expect the best out of yourself, work hard, be grateful.
I love those three non-negotiables. So I had the first two down, but I didn't know whether there were any more non-negotiables around that. So, you've definitely been clear in terms of no individual first, and working hard, which has been apparent right throughout the conversation. And I think that gratefulness certainly ties into that as well, which is both for us as coaches, again, which relates back to, what we expect others to do, and expect ourselves to do in that. And the final one, which always ends nicely for a conversation, is what is the one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
At first I would have said it was the wins and the losses and the big games, like all that stuff. But as cliche as it is, I would say, 100% it's the people, right? It's the people that you get to be around. I coach with some unbelievable people who I consider to be close friends of mine. I coach some amazing kids, and I've coached some amazing kids. I coach on the boys' side too. So I know we talked a lot about, the girls' side because of the high school that I'm at. But, some of the boys that I've coached, some of those teams were just some of the epitome, right, of what great teams are and what great teams do. So it's 100% the people. I've enjoyed it. I've met some of my best friends through coaching, and people who've changed my life through coaching, whether it's a mentor, or whether it's a player that I've learned something from. It's the people, for sure.
I love that. And what a great way to finish what has been such a great conversation with you, especially covering a lot within this couple of hours which we've had together. So I love that we overcame the technical difficulties.
Yeah, definitely.
How we've been able to bring this together. Because,
sorry for the cameo earlier of my teaching buddy who came in. I don't think he realized I was doing this live, but I'm sorry. He's now famous. I'll tell him he's famous. So
absolutely.
Appreciate it.
It's not a problem at all, but I appreciate you being adaptable and organising this, especially so early in the morning on a Sunday, which is
now I got to run home. I got to catch that United game, right? I got to catch that United game, so I'm going to stream it in the car. Don't tell my wife.
Absolutely won't. But thank you very much, Chip, and it's been great to speak to you, and I look forward to catching up with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Luca. Appreciate it.
No worries. Have a good day.
Yep.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need three different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other two, and that's absolutely fine.